Turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus begins what is commonly called the Olivet Discourse. Jesus is there on the Mount of Olives with His disciples, and He begins to speak right before His death. He begins to speak of His return. And Jesus talks about the signs. Jesus warns about what's going to happen before He returns. And then He begins at the end of 24 to say, no one's going to know when this is going to happen. This is going to be sudden. Jesus likens it to the days of Noah. He says there's going to be two people in the field, and just like in the days of Noah, one's going to be taken away in judgment, and one will be remaining. He is saying that you won't know when it's coming, and then He begins to tell these parables, these stories, where He is calling on people to be ready for that moment. He tells the story of a master who goes away, and there are two servants, and one of the servants says, he's going to be gone for a long time. We can just do whatever we want to do. We can party. He beats people. He gets drunk. And the other servant just keeps working. And then the master returns unexpectedly and punishes the wicked servant and commends the righteous servant. Jesus tells the story of 10 virgins, 10 bridesmaids, if you will. And in it, 5 of them are at the wedding reception, and they all go out, but 5 of them don't have any oil for their lamps. 5 of them were not prepared. They just went out. And the other 5 knew it might be a little bit, and so they had plenty of oil to go. And Jesus is calling on His disciples to be prepared for when He comes. He's calling on them to be ready for when He comes. And then He gets to the story of the talents that we're going to look at this morning in verse 14. And Jesus is going to liken this. So again, as we're reading this, we need to link this to what Jesus has said previously. Jesus has been talking about how we should be ready, how we should prepare for His return that is going to come suddenly and going to come unexpectedly. And so look with me in verse 14 of Matthew chapter 25 and see what Jesus says. He says, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents went and made 2 more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of these servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. And the master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I've made 2 talents more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sowed, and you gather where I have no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have in abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Jesus here tells this story of 3 servants. All three of them given an amount of resources, an amount of funds. All three of them called to invest it. All three of them called to steward it. Two of them do what Jesus called them to do. One of them does not. I want us to look at this parable this morning and see what Christ is teaching us from it. The first thing we need to do is I must ask myself, what has God entrusted to me? See, Jesus tells a story, and the man gives what are called talents to these servants. Now, a talent is not a form of currency. It's not a monetary thing. It's actually a measurement of weight. It's not an amount of money. There's a lot of debate as to how much this would be. A lot of people estimate that a talent could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. The idea here is it's a lot, right? Jesus gives a lot to each one of these men. So the man who has 5 talents, his master's literally given him millions of dollars, possibly. The one who has 1 talent, his master is still giving him a fortune. Right? If you take some of these estimates that say a talent is equal to about 20 years' wages, he's giving him a lifetime here. We, in English, we use that word talent. As a matter of fact, it came over, the word talents came from this parable. And we use it to describe those things that we're good at. But really, I think Jesus very specifically uses a vague measurement here because he's not talking about one particular thing. He's not trying to get us to keep in mind one thing. Jesus is asking, what is it that God has entrusted you with? See, God entrusts different gifts to each of us. One man is given 5 talents here. One man is given 2. One is given 1. God has given each one of us, God has given every one of us different talents. He's given us different things that He's entrusted to us. But God has entrusted to us all different things, but we are all entrusted with a lot. A lot of times we focus on what we're not entrusted with instead of focusing on what we are entrusted with. There are 4 things that I think every single one of us have been entrusted with to some degree or another. One is we've all been entrusted with time. Every single one of us who are alive have time. Now, the reality is some of us may not have as much time as others. I mean, mathematically, statistically, I don't have as long left to live as Henry does. I'm 34, Henry's 6. Statistically, he's got more time than I have. Some people are not going to live as long. You know, we've got a number of ladies in our church that are in their late 80s and early 90s, and that is a long life that God has graciously given them. We've got people, and we've had church members live to be over 100 here. God's given them a lot of time, and whether He's given you a lot of time or He's given you a little time, He's given you now. He's given you time. And what we need to do is we need to think, okay, I'm entrusted with time. How can I use this time? Back in the 30s, there was a man by the name of Kaz Wilmot. Kaz Wilmot lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and he would just take Saturdays and he would go and he would just walk around neighborhoods in Lexington. He drove a bus for the Ashland Avenue Baptist Church, and he would just go and he would see if he could pick up people. And Kaz Wilmot one day walked down North Limestone there in Lexington. It was more of a rundown neighborhood, and he knocked on the door of a house. And this house was a woman, her husband, and 10 kids. And Kaz Wilmot said, "Would you mind if I came and picked up you and your children and brought you all to church?" The woman had grown up in a Christian family, but her husband was an alcoholic and didn't want anything to do with church. Sundays was his drinking day. He didn't have to work that day, and so it was more time for him to drink and to entertain himself. But she said, "Yes, I'd love for you to come pick me up." And Kaz Wilmot came and he picked up those 10 children and that woman. And they began bringing them to church. And one of those 10 children was my grandfather, Wallace. Eventually, 9 of those 10 grandchildren, or of those 10 children got saved. Eventually, the husband got saved, gave up his drinking, changed his life radically, eventually became a deacon. My great-grandfather was a deacon in a church where my grandfather pastored. And if that man hadn't said, hey, I've got some time, I want to invest it for the kingdom's sake, I don't know where I'd be today. I don't know what I would be doing. My great-grandfather, he was ornery. He would get drunk and he would have his kids. He would just get drunk and basically make them go beat up other kids just for his entertainment. Sit on the porch and watch them. And if God had not grabbed a hold of them, who knows where my family would be today. And it was all because somebody said, I've got time and I want to use it well. We all have time. We all have been entrusted with resources. Again, some have more than others. But what we need to realize is pretty much every single one of us in this room, though we may not have as many resources as others, we still have more resources than most of the world. We have running water. We have indoor plumbing. God has blessed us. God has given us these resources. God has given us money. God has given us stuff. We have homes. We have cars. God has given us things, and we have those that we have been entrusted to us. We have those possessions. We have those resources financially. We have a job. We have all of that stuff that God has given to us, and we have to seek to use it for Him. We've been entrusted with resources. I mean, just think about this. There was a time hundreds of years ago where nobody had books in their home. Nobody had books that they could keep, and so information was really hard to get by, to get around to people. Now, some 500 years after the printing press, within seconds, we can send out information that goes to the other side of the world. Let me just ask you, do you use social media for you or for the glory of God? A lot of people use social media to just argue politics and to share fake news and, make themselves seem greater than they are. I mean, we use it for us. Right, here's this tool that we can use. Here's something we can invest in. Here's something we can make the most of. We can use it to encourage people. We can use it to share the gospel. We can use it to reach others. We can use it to invite people to church. We can use it to celebrate good and godly things. God has given us so many resources, and yes, money is one of those, but money is part of what God is doing. It's not all that God is doing. We've got houses we can use for God. We've got cars we can use for God. We have all this stuff, and our goal needs to be, how can I use this? How can this which God has entrusted to me be used for Him? We've been entrusted with relationships. Every single one of us in this room has relationships. At least we should. You've got parents. You've got children. You've got siblings. You've got extended family. You've got coworkers. You've got neighbors. All of those relationships that are in your life are people to whom God has entrusted you. These are people that God has given you. These are people that God has provided you to be a blessing to. God has put you, God brings people into your path, and God puts you in people's path for you to encourage them and for you to strengthen them. So often we treat these relationships in our life, we treat people in our life as, what can I get from them? How can they advance me? And how can they help me out? And we seek to gain from them, but we need to see these people as talents that God has given us. We need to see them as people that God has put in our lives, and we answer to Him for how faithfully we serve Him amongst them. Every day, you might have coworkers that you're around. What do you do? How do you encourage them? How do you bless them? Every day you've got a neighbor that you see as you go in your house or come out of your house. How faithfully do you steward that neighbor? You've got a family member, and we got the holidays coming up. They have to be there just like you have to be there. How do you use that for God? God has stewarded us. He has given us all of these relationships that He has entrusted to us. Moms and dads, listen. Your child is not there for you to better yourself, for you to live out unfulfilled dreams, for you to provide security when you're in your old age. Your child is there for you to train and to raise in the fear and knowledge of the Lord. And I think one of the greatest mistakes that we as Christians make is we don't see our children always as gifts that God gives us for us to steward well for Him. We need to take these relationships we've been entrusted with and make the most of them. We've also been entrusted with aptitude, in the sense that most of us use the word talent. Paul talks about this in the New Testament. He talks about spiritual gifts that God has given us, abilities that God has given us. You know, I can't sing worth a lick. Y'all don't want me to try? It would be bad. But God's blessed Sarah. Sarah can sing. And there are times where I go, oh man, I wish I could sing. But God has not blessed me with that. There are people that look at what I do and they think, man, I could never stand up in front of a room full of people and talk. It's just not a big deal to me. It's never been a big deal to me. I've just never in my life, I've always kind of been the ham and the cheese. You just get up in front of a room and act a fool. I haven't just been doing that since God called me to preach. I've been doing that my whole life. And we all have these different gifts. Some can sing, some can speak, some are really handy. Again, if something breaks in my house, forget it. I can't do anything. And thankfully, there are people that God has given that aptitude. My grandfather, my mom's dad, he dropped out of school in 7th grade, never finished high school, but that man mechanically could figure out anything. He had a mind that worked like that. Where did that come from? God gave him that. We all have passions that God gives us. Things we care about. Things that drive us. Things we love. Everybody's got different things. One of the things that I love about a church, and it's frustrating sometimes about a church, is all these different people have different aspects of church ministry that they really, really care about. Michael, how's the prayer ministry going? Michael, how's the outreach ministry going? How's children's ministry? God gives us all these different passions. And when God gives you that passion, you know what that's God telling you? Here's where I want you to serve. I've given you this passion. I have brought this up in you. Now use it. This is why we need churches, is because all of us with these different gifts and different passions, we come together and we strengthen each other and we help each other and we support each other in our weakness and we encourage each other in our strength. None of us can do this by ourselves and none of us can do this alone. But because each one of us has been entrusted with these different talents, these different aptitudes and passions, God brings us together for His glory to accomplish a purpose. And so I have to ask myself, what has God entrusted to me? Realizing it may be different than the person who sits next to me in the pew. It may be different than my spouse, but God has entrusted something to me. God has entrusted probably more to me than I would care to admit on first blush. So what has God entrusted to me? But second, I must be a faithful steward of what God has entrusted to me. See, the master comes and the master gives these talents to his servants. 2 of them were faithful and were commended. 1 of them was not. I have to be a faithful steward. of what God has entrusted to me. So as I think about what God entrusts to me, now I have to realize, how can I be faithful with this? And for me to be faithful, I have to have the mind of a steward. What is the mind of a steward? Well, first I need to realize that all God has entrusted to me belongs to Him, not to me. When the master gave the talents to these people, 5, 2, and 1, did they go, man, thanks, I'm going to go have a big old time. This is going to be a great day. 5 talents, man, I can go spend this. Oh, I can go get a new car. I can put a down payment on a house. This is great. No, they knew this is not your money. This is not your stuff. You are a steward of it. You're a caretaker of it. And one of the biggest problems in our life is we take what God gives us and we think it's mine and I can do with it what I want. It's my money, it's my time, it's my gift, it's my family, it's my house. And all good things, as James says, they come from above. They come from the Father of lights. Every good thing we have in our life is because God has given it to us. And we treat it like owners instead of like stewards. See, the faithful stewards went and they wanted to utilize what the master had given them to get the best return. The one who did not understand this, he just buries it. He's not trying to steward his money well. He's just trying to protect himself. He's trying to help himself. Not only do I need to realize that all I have, all that I've been entrusted with is God's, not mine. Second, I need to realize that whatever I have been entrusted with is to be used to glorify God. Whatever I've been entrusted with, not only is it not mine, its purpose is not for me. See, the goal here, the goal for the stewards was the joy of the master. They wanted to take what God had entrusted to them and bring their master joy. Notice, they did not have joy until their master had joy. See, whatever it is that God gives us, not only does it not belong to me, it's not to be used to make me great. It's not to be used to make me more comfortable. It's ultimately to be used to glorify God. Now, if it makes me more comfortable in the process, that's fine. It's not a sin to have a big house. Just a sin to say, God's given me this big house, but He needs to keep His hands off of it. It's not a sin to have a nice car, but it's a sin to say, I'm not going to pick up anybody in this car because they might spill something in it. Listen, it's not yours. Here's something you need to see. You notice the master says, I've given you a little. Now, in your first century, when the audience heard Jesus talking about this man being given 5 talents, this is a lifetime's worth of wealth. They would not have thought of this as a little. They would have said, this is a lot. But to the master, it's a little. See, when I try and treat what God has entrusted to me as mine, I'm neglecting how much God has has ownership of, and how much He can supply my needs. We need to seek to glorify God with whatever He's entrusted to us. Whether it's our time, whether it's our resources, whether it's our relationships or our aptitude, my goal in everything, I need to ask, how am I using what God has given me to bring glory to Him? How am I raising my kids to know and love God? How am I using my house to serve God? How does my bank account reflect my service to God? How does my time? I spend so much time. It's so funny that as Christians, we talk about, boy, I read 3 chapters in the Bible today. That was a lot. And then we turn around and we watch a 3.5-hour football game like it's nothing. I'm guilty of it too. The things of God always get bumped low on the time priority list. I don't have time to serve at church, but I do have time to go fishing. I don't have time to read my Bible, but I do have time to watch a game. I don't have time to help somebody out, but I do have time to go shopping. Right? We take what God has given us and we fail to use it to glorify Him. But then third, in the mind of a steward says, whatever has been given to me is sufficient for the task that God has for me. You notice what Jesus says in this parable. It says each one was given to according to their ability. What that means is God gave them what they needed. God gave them what He could trust them with. One of the things that we need to realize is we read this, you read one got 5, one got 2, one got 1. Right? The American in us goes, that's not fair. They should all, just give them all 3. Just give them all 2, whatever. But it needs to be fair. But you see, Jesus says the Master gave knowing who He could trust. He gave according to their abilities. But He gave each one of them what they need, because I want you to see something very important. Look with me at this. Look in verse 21, all right? So the guy who has 5 talents, he comes back and he makes 5 talents more. Listen to what the Master says. The Master says, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Okay, you hear that? Now listen. The guy who brings 2 talents comes and brings back 2 more. And listen to what the Master says. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Do you hear that? It's the exact same. He doesn't say, hey, you brought me more money. I'm more proud of you. What does He say? You both were faithful. Well done. He gave one 5, and that man served well with 5. And Jesus said, the Master says, well done. He gave one 2. That man was faithful with 2. And Jesus says, well done. The goal is not to have more. The goal is just to be faithful. Right? So often we sit around and we think, well, if I just had this ability, if I could sing like them, then God could really use me. If I could stand up before a room and speak, then God could use me. If God just gave me a better job, then things would be better. If God would just give me a different spouse, then things would be better. Listen, you have what you need. All you need is to be faithful. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, Peter says that you have been given everything you need for life and godliness. What does that mean? That means that there is nothing that you are lacking to do what God is calling you to do. You know why I can't sing? Because God's not calling me to be a singer. He doesn't, that's not part of what His plan for my life is. So He says, I'm not giving you that. A lot of times we look and we think, if I just had this, if I could just do this, if God would just supply this, then I would serve. But what is Jesus saying? If you can't be faithful with a little, I'm not going to give you a lot. We are so self-centered and we are so prideful that we think we don't have to be faithful with a little. God, you just go ahead and give me a lot, then I'll be faithful. That doesn't work. I tell Henry all the time, buddy, if you don't get a handle on this now, life's just going to be a whole lot harder for you. If you can't learn something at 6, it's going to be a lot harder at 16. Listen, if Henry takes, he's got this little scooter, and if he keeps running it into the wall, and he keeps crashing that scooter, and he's reckless with that scooter, and he disobeys Sarah and me with that scooter, you think when he turns 16, we're going to go, here's you some car keys, have fun. No. If he can't drive a scooter, I'm not trusting him with a car. And so it is, we think, well, God, if you'll just give me more, then I'll be faithful. And God's saying, no, you have everything you need right now. Just serve. We spend so much time complaining, well, I don't have 5 talents. I don't have 2 talents. Serve with what you have been given. And Jesus says, then you will be given more. Prove yourself faithful with a little, then you will be put over much. I need to realize that whatever God is calling me to, He has given me what is sufficient for me to be faithful in that. And so my focus does not need to be on what more I expect from God, but my focus needs to be, how can I be faithful to God? That's what a steward does. But third, I realize that faithful servants are expected to maximize all God entrusts to them. So if I realize, okay, God has entrusted to me things like time and resources and relationships and aptitude, and then I'm a steward of these things, what does it mean to be a faithful steward? Well, it means I maximize what God entrusts to me. It means that I make the most out of it. I bring return from it. See, we're not just saved from sin. We are saved to serve. Jesus is speaking to whom here? He's speaking to a group of Jews. He's speaking with the backdrop of the Old Testament. From the very beginning of the Old Testament, the Israelites have been told what is their purpose in existing. You are existing to be a light to the world. You are existing so that through you all nations of the earth would be blessed. From the call to Abraham and the creation of the Jewish people, God's purpose for them has been that they reach out beyond themselves. But as we've gone through the Bible this year, especially looking at the prophets, what have they failed to do? They failed to reach out beyond themselves. They just look around. Well, they're wicked people, and they're wicked people, and we're just praying for their destruction. And so Jesus is coming to do what Israel has failed to do. Jesus is coming to be this blessing that Israel has failed to be. He is fulfilling what God had promised. And Jesus is saying what is going on here is they failed to maximize. They failed to be good stewards and to make the most of what God had entrusted to them. And now He is telling the disciples, guys, I'm about to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to ascend, and you're going to be on your own in the sense that I'm not going to physically, bodily be here with you. And I am giving you this teaching. I am giving you so much. You need to maximize what you are doing. You see, God expects a return from us. And God is entitled to a return from us because God has invested in us the blood of His own Son. Why are we saved? We are saved because Jesus came and lived a sinless life. Because Jesus died in my place on the cross. Jesus took the wrath of God that I deserved. Jesus, in dying, gave me His righteousness so that I could have a relationship with God. And He rose from the dead so that death is conquered and it has no sting any longer. God invested the very life and the death of His Son in you and in me, and He expects and He is entitled to return on that investment. He has not just saved us so we don't have to go to hell. He has saved us so that we can serve Him. He has saved us so that we can be utilized in what He is doing here in the world. Again, so often we treat the things that God calls us to do as a burden. It is not a burden. It is a joy. Do you see how magnificent it is that God takes sinners? He takes those of us who are broken and those of us who are failing, and those of us who have made horrible mistakes, those of us who have rebelled against Him. He takes those of us who are sinners and He uses us to transform the world by His grace and for His glory. That is remarkable. And yet so many Christians just want to sit and wait. That's what Israel was doing. They were just sitting and waiting for the Messiah to come. He'll come, He'll fix everything. He'll come, He'll take care of all the problems. We're just going to sit here, we're going to keep to ourselves, and we're going to wait. Jesus is saying that's not okay. That is not what God has saved us for. So you can't get a reward if you don't take a risk. For the two servants who took what the master gave them, it involved risk. They had to invest, and maybe they bought land, or maybe they invested in a ship. Maybe who knows what they did? It's irrelevant what they did. The idea is that they brought back, but in order for them to get a return, there had to be a risk. Now, I want you to see something. It says that the master was gone for a long time. This is not about just quickly turning some things over. This is about a long process. This is about investing. You know, if you talk to a financial investor, they'll tell you sometimes you just have to wait. Sometimes for you to get a return on your investment, it needs to take time. And so it is here that these men, they make the investment, they take the risk, and they wait. If you bought 1,000 shares of Walmart in 1970 when it went public, it was $16.50 a share. Right? So a $1,650 investment in 1970 would today be worth $12 million. But that was a risk. For Christians, for churches, to get a return, we have to take a risk. We have to try new things. We have to get dirty. We have to do stuff that might make us uncomfortable because we've never done it that way before. But if we just keep doing the same thing and we expect different results, that's the very definition of insanity. I remember when I was a youth pastor and we had a youth weekend. We called it Disciple Now, and we had all these kids come in. And so we were there Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning. I have a lady come up to me and she said, "Do you know what is written on the bathroom wall?" I said, "No, ma'am." And some child had written a very profane word on the bathroom wall. She said, "If they're going to treat our church like that, we don't need to have them here." I said, "If we don't need to have them here, then we don't need to have a church here." You know, when you let people in to your life, when you bring people in, it gets messy. One of my favorite verses in all the Bible is in Proverbs. Proverbs 14, verse 4. "Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of the ox." You know what it's saying? You want a clean barn? Don't put any cows in there, because cows will make a mess. But you're also not going to get any crops because you won't have anybody to work them. Right? If we want God to change our community, our church needs to be a little dirty. It needs to experience a little risk. We need to do things a little different. We need to try things. They may work, they may not. They may fail, they may succeed. But we need to say we can't just do what we've always done. We can't just settle for the status quo, because our Master is entitled to so much more than that. Our Master is entitled to so much greater things than that. God has invested the blood of His Son, and we ought to give Him a return. To fail to invest is to fail to increase. See, the reason we fail to increase is because we fail to invest. Every church says we want to grow, and almost every church is lying. Because what they mean is, if people will come and act like us and think like us and be like us and not ask any questions and do everything the way we've always done it, we don't want this whole developing and discipling Christians, that's too much, then they're welcome. But to fail to invest is to fail to increase. Listen, there is nothing in your life that is worthwhile that if you don't invest in, you won't get something from. Being a dad, that's a huge investment. It's an investment of time. It's an investment of sanity. It's an investment of all sorts of things. Right? If you want a good marriage, you have to invest in it. You cannot have a good marriage by simply sitting around and expecting it to happen. There needs to be an investment. There needs to be risk involved where I'm going to do things that I may not want to do in order to be a blessing to my spouse. I'm going to do things I don't like doing in order to be a blessing to my spouse. This may not be the most enjoyable thing, but I want to encourage and strengthen them. Right? For us to get a return, it involves all of this. But Jesus wants to see us to see that this is far more than a matter of disobedience, because it goes to our very attitude. See, my attitude towards God determines what I want to do for God. If you look, it's the attitude between the servants that determines the difference between their actions. A loving servant seeks to do the right thing. You have the two servants, right? It says there that when the one was given 5 talents, he went at once. He's immediately, as soon as God gives him this gift, he immediately wants to go and invest it. He immediately wants to go and make it work. He immediately wants to go and get the most out of it because he loves the master, because there is this relationship with the master. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to honor the master. He wants to get the greatest return for the master. But then you have the other servant. See, a loving servant seeks to do the right thing, but a lazy servant settles for not doing the wrong thing. You may not know this about me, but I actually have less fielding errors in Major League Baseball than Ozzie Smith does. And I have struck out less in the major leagues than Stan Musial did. Never once struck out, never once had a fielding error in a Major League Baseball game. Now, it is also true that I've never played in a Major League Baseball game. But I don't go around bragging about that. I don't go around saying, I've never struck out. You know what? I've never had a turnover for the University of Kentucky men's basketball team. I have fewer turnovers than every player that's ever played there because I never played for them. You have this one servant, and what he does is he buries the money. Now, that seems strange to us, but burying money was very common back then. Banking practices were new, and the Romans really took advantage of those that they occupied. And so burying money, as a matter of fact, you read a lot of the rabbis, the rabbinical tradition encourages burying money. And he goes and he buries the money because that's the safest thing. But you see, his goal is not to do the right thing. His goal is to just not do the wrong thing. Because when he brings it before the master, he says, well, I knew you were a hard man. You have reaped what you did not sow. You've harvested seed you did not plant. Basically, he's accusing him of theft there. You profit off the work of everybody else. And I knew you were hard, and so if I lost your money, then you would be mad at me. And the master answers him and he says, if you really thought I was that hard, if you really thought I was that ornery, then it should have caused you all the more to try and bring a return on it. But the man did not care about the joy of his master. He just cared about not getting punished himself. He didn't care about making his master glad. He just didn't want to be punished. But the cruel irony of the story is in failing to do the right thing, he actually did a wrong thing. A lot of Christians, we don't like to do the risk of doing the right thing. I don't want to talk to them about Jesus because it's going to make things awkward. I don't want to share Christ with them because you're not supposed to talk about religion. I don't want to give money because I can't afford to give it. You know, and we even convince ourselves sometimes, well, if I help them out, they're just going to take advantage of me. You see, this servant, he's so wicked, he even blames the master for his own sin. He says, well, you're a hard man. You are the one that put me in this position. Remember back in Genesis, somebody else saying that? It was the woman that you gave to me that caused me to eat this fruit that you made. We try and pawn off our own sin and our own disobedience and our own laziness with God. And we are lazy. We take all that God gives us and we think, I'd rather not do something bad, so I just won't do anything at all. I'd rather not hurt anything. I'd rather not upset anything, so I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to wait. I'll be at church on Sundays. I'll even be at church on Wednesdays. I'll go to Sunday school, but don't expect me to do anything more than that. See, God didn't just give you Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. God gave you 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. God gave you every breath that you breathe in your lungs. God gave you every penny you have in your bank account. God gave you every brick and every piece of siding on your house. God gave you every nut and every bolt in your car. And everything that you have is from Him. And everything you have is for Him. And you do not get the luxury of trying to bury it and then just wait until He comes back. See, here is the sad ending of the story. The man that was not faithful with his one talent, it was taken away from him and it was given to another. Here's the reality. If you're not faithful with what God gives you, it doesn't mean God's not going to work. It just means He's going to work through somebody else. If you sit there and you bury your talents and you just wait, it doesn't mean that God's plan is thwarted. It doesn't mean that He has to wait. It just means that instead of you receiving the blessing of God working through you, instead of you getting to see up close the hand of God work and move in great ways, God just works through somebody else. And that's true of Christians, that's true of churches, that's true. If we refuse to do what God calls us to do with what He has entrusted to us, God's just going to accomplish His purposes through someone else. And so this morning, we need to look at these two evaluations that the Master gives and ask, what would God say of you? When He returns, and it will be unexpected, it will be at a time when you're not ready. It's not something that you can think, well, I'm just going to wait and then I'll prepare. Right? We need to be working every moment of every day, because when He comes, we're going to get His evaluation. And is He going to look at you and is He going to say, well done, good and faithful servant? Enter into the joy of your Master. Or is God going to look at you and is God going to say, you wicked and lazy servant, cast this worthless servant into outer darkness? It's going to be one of those two. Those are only two options. There is no third option. If we love the Master, then we will work for the Master. But if we disdain the Master, if we resent the Master, if our love is not what it ought to be for the Master, then our lives will be marked by laziness in what He calls us to do. And so every day we need to realize God has given me today. How can I steward today? How can I steward the opportunities God has given me today? Listen, I hear Christians all the time, we pray, God, give me opportunities. Listen, God gives us dozens upon dozens of opportunities every single day. My prayer needs to not just be, God, give me opportunities. My prayer needs to be, God, make me sensitive to the opportunities that you are giving me. Help me be sensitive to the needs of the people that you've entrusted to me. Help me be sensitive to use the resources you've given me well for you. Help me to be sensitive how I can best use my time for you. Give me wisdom for how I can take the gifts that you've given me and the passions that you've instilled in me and channel those for your good and for your glory. Because nothing ought to drive us more in life than the greatest treasure that God can ever give us, the greatest thing God can ever present us with, and that is the commendation of a Father saying, well done. May that be what we live for. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, Lord, I thank you so much for all you have entrusted to us. God, I confess in my own life how I fail to use the things that you've entrusted to me for you. Sometimes I use them for me, or sometimes I just bury them. Father, I pray this morning you would help us see more clearly the things that you've given to us. Father, I pray that we would have the mind of a steward that says they're not ours, but are to be used for your glory, and that what you've given us is enough, and we just need to seek to be faithful. So, Father, I pray that as we faithfully serve you with what you've given us, that, Father, that there would be an increase, that people would be blessed, souls would be saved, lives would be changed, marriages would be healed, better parents, more faithful workers, greater witnesses for you. And Father, I pray that through it all, your name is made great. Father, I pray that what drives us every single day is a love for you that desires nothing more and will settle for nothing less than hearing, well done. So, Father, may that be the passion that pushes us through each day. Father, I pray if there's anyone here this morning that's never put their faith in you, they've taken all the life that you've given them, and Father, they've sought to use it for themselves. Father, you've given them this day. You've given them this moment, and may they be the best stewards of it by saying that they need to trust you and follow you as their Lord and Savior. Father, as we have this time of invitation, may we steward it well, to respond how you're leading us, to confess what we need to confess, to ask for help where we need help, to encourage one another where we need to encourage one another, whatever it may be. But may it be for you and for your glory. It's in the name of Christ we pray.